brush up on some typical admissions or job interview types of questions. So successes, failures, sort of teamwork, challenges, those types of things, those typical kind of behavioral areas. And then a little bit about why you want to get an MBA, what you want to do with it, those types of things. But really not any heavy preparation. It should hopefully be pretty straightforward. No trick questions. We very consistently tell candidates, this is not going to determine the outcome of your candidacy, so don't feel as though this is like your whole candidacy is riding on this. We use it, as we say, with a light touch.
Welcome to Admission Straight Talk, the podcast dedicated to graduate admissions and helping you approach the application process thoughtfully and successfully. Your host is Accepted's founder and world-renowned admissions guru, Linda Abraham. At Accepted, our mission is to get you to that unforgettable moment when you read your acceptance email and shout, "Yes, I'm in!" Confident you'll be attending the perfect program to help you launch the career of your dreams.
Welcome to the 598th episode of Admission Straight Talk. Thanks for tuning in. You are invited to take the free 6-question quiz at accepted.com/mapmba and see how prepared you are to actually apply. You'll also gain access to relevant other resources, both free and paid, that can help you develop your application strategy for acceptance. Just go to accepted.com/mapmba, just like it sounds, to take your quiz, access the framework, and those other resources I mentioned. It gives me great pleasure to have back on Admission Straight Talk, Bruce DelMonico, Assistant Dean of Admissions at Yale School of Management. He's been on the admissions team at Yale SOM since 2004, became the director in 2006, and the assistant dean in 2012. Bruce, welcome back to Admission Straight Talk.
Thank you so much, Linda. It's great to be here. I always enjoy it.
My pleasure. I do too. All right, let's start with my usual basic overview of the Yale SOM MBA program for listeners who may not be that familiar with it and focusing on its more distinctive elements.
Sure. Yeah. Here at Yale, so the flagship MBA, it's a 2-year full-time MBA. So some of the same things you would experience at other programs, but I think some of the distinctive things, I would point out maybe 3 things that I think are particularly distinctive. Our integration to the larger Yale University, our distinctively global posture, and I think our curriculum, or the way we actually teach the material that you learn, is actually somewhat distinctive, and we think prepares you particularly well to be a leader in the 21st century. So I think just to dig in just briefly, when you come to Yale, you really come to the entire university, and so one of the ways that's manifest, you actually can take as many electives as you want at the rest of the university. You could take all of your electives outside of SOM. So really the university is open to you, and that extends to the co-curricular opportunities, the alumni networks, those types of things. So I think that's great. On the global front, we do have our Global Network for Advanced Management. Actually, as we're speaking, exams are happening, winding down, and then Global Network Week is happening, which means our students are going to one of the 30 different global network schools around the world that are part of this network that we've developed and started. It's now taken on a life of its own, but that's among the very distinctive global opportunities that exist here at Yale. And then the curriculum, we might talk about this more, but we teach in a much more interdisciplinary, much more integrated, holistic way than other programs. We think that does uniquely prepare our students to be effective leaders for the 21st century and for business and society, which is our founding mission.
Okay, well, we're going to get that in a minute. But in terms of the global network,
yes.
So obviously during COVID, people weren't traveling. But as I recall, part of the idea behind the global network was that students at Yale actually participated in they didn't necessarily travel to the schools, but they were taking classes with students from other countries. And it is global. Is that still true that even if they don't physically go to the other schools, other campuses?
That is true. I think one of the cornerstones of it is the travel piece because being part of that network. So we have 30 schools on 5 continents, and so you can travel to Koç University in Turkey, or you can go to Egade, or you can go to Renmin, or across the globe. But even in addition to the physical travel, there are virtual courses that are part of the global network, and so there are opportunities to take virtual global network courses and with students from the other global network schools. And so I think that's also a really unique opportunity. I think it does help train you very well. Obviously, a lot of work that's done now is not getting on a plane and flying somewhere, but it's actually being on Zoom like we are, kind of connecting
Yeah.
virtually across time zones, across geographies. And so having that experience when you're a student, I think is very valuable.
Absolutely. Now, I noticed you mentioned this in your first answer, that throughout the site, there's an emphasis on the mission of Yale SOM, which is educating leaders for business and society. How is that mission manifested in the program and the curriculum and the classroom?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. I think in a lot of ways, and really, I invoked it. You just asked about it. So the mission, that really is the sort of the touchstone for the school. It's the founding mission to educate leaders for business and society. It's a kind of broad, ambitious, multi-sector mission. And it does, we can talk about other aspects, but it really does inform the classroom experience. Our curriculum, we call it our, integrated curriculum. And it does, it teaches a lot of the same materials, but it goes beyond sort of business concepts into other disciplines. So you're going to learn not just kind of, discounted cash flow analysis and kind of weighted average cost of capital and those types of things, but you'll learn, how sort of the law and medicine and the environment and psychology, sociology, all these other disciplines inform business. And so it's very, integrated in that way. And material also is organized in a way that it really has our students thinking across disciplines, across sectors.
Can you give an example?
Yeah, happy to, and so we actually have our own case writing team here, and we teach what we call raw cases, which are, different than the cooked cases you get at other schools, where, the case writing team will distill down all the relevant information into, the 7 or 10 page document. Our raw cases are much messier. The idea is that we give the case writing team assembles all the materials and then gives those primary materials to the students, because in the real world, that's what you're dealing with. You're not dealing with you don't have a case writing team that kind of does all that work for you. You have to do that work. So a lot of this is all preamble to say a lot of the material in the first year is taught by the raw case method. One of the raw cases, as an example, that student study is on the Norwegian Sovereign Wealth Fund. And so that's someone we actually have a faculty member who advised to Norway on their sovereign wealth fund, and so that we have some firsthand experience. But that's an example that I think is international. It's not a sort of white male U.S. protagonist. It's international. It's multi-sector. It's got elements of finance. The fund, it's got the public sector because it's a sovereign wealth fund. It's used for social purposes, some of the funds. So it really is an example of a case that kind of spans the sectors, is global in nature, and it touches on a lot of the aspects of the school that I think are quite unique.
All right. Now, we were talking about the integrated nature of the program, especially the core.
Yeah.
And that core culminates in a course called the executive. Can you discuss both the integrated nature of the core and specifically the executive course?
Yeah, no, happy to do that. And I give a little more I talked a little bit about some aspects of the curriculum, but the kind of the heart of the first year core curriculum are what we call our integrated perspectives courses. And so again, that takes a lot of the material that you would learn at other schools, but organizes it differently. And organizes it instead by discrete functions, which is how other schools tend to be organized, which I think made sense, 50, 60 years ago, when MBA graduates would go to large multinational corporations and work within a single function within that organization. But now obviously graduates have much different careers. And so the curriculum is meant to reflect that. So these organizational perspectives really, they organize the material according to stakeholders. So things like customer, employee, investor,
regulator.
Innovator, as their state society, and the executive is kind of like the capstone course. So each individual course takes a different stakeholder perspective. There are about a dozen in total. And so one example I give is the customer class here is sort of like the marketing class, but it goes beyond that. So instead of just teaching the 4 Ps and kind of the marketing function, it incorporates the marketing function, but then adds, HR, it adds operations, it adds technology. So the other disciplines that you would think of, there's psychology, sociology, to understand the customer experience and how all parts of an organization need to work together to satisfy the customer experience. And so that's a stakeholder. And then those all ladder up into the executive, which is the capstone. And then that's where you kind of think about all the different stakeholders together and the various trade-offs you need to make. So if you're doing something that satisfies the investor, what does that do to the employee? And how is the customer experience affected by what you do in the operations engine? So that's where you really think about it all together.
Are you cutting costs, which will also damage the customer experience? And
exactly.
That's
I
the way
don't
up.
know if you, yeah. So I think that's kind of where you've got to, it really all kind of comes together in the first year.
Okay, that's very, very interesting. Let's get to the application part of things here, okay?
Yeah.
Yale has innovative and multifaceted application requiring a test score. Okay, so you're stuck with a test score, either GMAT or GRE. There are written components, there's a resume, a video, a behavioral assessment, and an interview, which is by invitation only.
Yes.
The behavioral assessment is quite distinctive on the MBA scene. What is it? What's the format? What's the reason for it?
Yeah.
From there.
Yeah, I mean, like, to give a little kind of distant history. So this is over, a decade. I can't even remember how far back it's, 12, 15 years.
Wow.
This started with Tom Kolditz, who was head of the leadership team at West Point, leadership department at West Point. He joined us and led our leadership development team here for a while. And when he came on board, he helped develop a test that ultimately was purchased by ETS and became the behavioral assessment. When he was here, we actually worked with him to kind of develop it and pilot it. And then we've rolled it out since it's now been, a half dozen years that we've fully been using it, but we've been piloting it for over a decade. The idea behind it, it's a non-cognitive assessment. So unlike the GMAT or the GRE, which are sort of cognitive assessments, this is non-cognitive. It's not meant to be an EQ test or a soft skills test, which I think some people think it is. It's meant to measure intra and interpersonal traits that are additive to our assessment of your academic preparation for the program. So it's again not meant to measure soft skills. It's meant to measure your academic preparation. The idea is we bring in lots of fantastic candidates, and there's some people who, based on their sort of grades and scores, perform better than you would expect, and some people, based on their grades and scores, who perform not as well as you would expect. Yeah. This isn't a perfect science there, but we're always trying to get better at it and do a better job in this prediction. And the behavioral assessment is meant to help us identify secondary and tertiary traits that will better kind of refine how we're looking at your academic preparation. And the thing we're really trying to do is, we know that there are lots of really fantastic candidates who might have more modest academic profiles, and we might want here at Yale for other reasons. They perform wonderfully in the workplace. They have great potential. We want to make sure, obviously, they get through the program in the short term. And so the behavioral assessment can give us more confidence that maybe someone with a more modest academic profile who has lots of other fantastic qualities, we can bring them into the program. So we use it to expand the pool of candidates we can consider. The test itself takes maybe 20, 25 minutes to complete. It's a forced choice test, which means what happens is you get a pair of statements that are meant to describe a person. They could be two positive, two negative, and you have to choose which one is most like you. And then there are 130 pairs, so you go, and it's adaptive, so no two people get the same one, and you go through these statements. You're supposed to go quickly. Obviously, 130 pairs, 20, 25 minutes. You're not going to, don't need to think about it. You don't need to prepare for it. It's just, I see this statement and this statement. Which one's more like me? I choose that one and then keep going. And over that course of 130, it builds a profile of you that we use to inform our assessment of your academic preparation for the program, and in a way that hopefully is expansive and allows us to be more, bring in more people to the program with more diverse backgrounds.
I see. All right. Thank you. Thank you very much for that.
Sure.
Now, going along with the assessment arena of admissions, what about GMAC's business writing assessment? Do you have any plans to require that? Are you requiring that? Because I saw somewhere that you were, but I didn't see it on the website.
Yeah, no, we're not requiring that. We'll have to see. We don't have any firm plans now, but we'll do. I'm going to actually be down in Reston next week, so I might ask about that and get a little more sense. I know that that's being developed and is out there. We don't have a requirement. comfortable with the things that we're currently requiring and the elements we currently are using to measure candidates' preparation for the program, but certainly we're always looking at other things that might be helpful. So, but we're not requiring it now.
Great. Now, I was going through Yale SOM's application guide, which is excellent. And listeners interested in applying to Yale, you definitely need to read it. We'll also link to it. It seems that you have an optional information question and a background information question, as well as a required essay with
Yep.
3 options and a 500-word limit. Is the background information required? I believe it is. Is it?
The background information is not required.
Okay.
So that's all optional information.
Okay, but what's the difference between these 3 elements? What would you like to see them cover? You don't want them to duplicate each other, I'm sure.
Yeah, so obviously, so the required essays, so as you say, there are 3 prompts. You get to choose which of the 3 that most speak to you, and then that's the required essay. And it's about so the biggest commitment you've made, the greatest challenge you faced, and the most meaningful community you've been a part of. And we used to have the commitment essay was the single one we had for a number of years. And then we found that we didn't want people to have to kind of conform to that prompt, and so that's why we added the community and the challenge, and to allow people really to write about the thing that's most meaningful to them. So that's the required essay. Everybody writes at the 500 words. The optional information is really more if there's something, a typical kind of optional, if there's something about your candidacy that you think we should know about, but it's not captured anywhere else, that's your opportunity to provide the information there. And then the background information is something we've been building out for a number of years. We recognize that people are not applying in a vacuum, right? So everybody is informed, influenced by their experiences that they had growing up, the opportunities that were available to them, the challenges they were facing, and the specific circumstances of their upbringings and their educational backgrounds. And so background information, it's optional, you don't have to fill it out, but it asks information about the context in which you've lived, more information about some of your familiar background, some of your own personal background, to help us understand your circumstances so that we can have that in mind as we're making decisions. Because we know, again, when you think about a test score or academic performance, those, as I said, those don't exist in a vacuum. A single score can mean different things depending on the context in which someone has lived and worked and operated. So that's why we ask for that background information. And for a lot of people, there's nothing to share, but for some people there is. And so that's where we invite people to share it if they have anything to do.
So would the optional information question typically be, you had a drop in grades due to illness or a family situation? Would that be typical of the optional information question?
That can be, yes. That's
gap in
true.
employment or something like that.
We actually have a separate question specifically for gap in employment. We took that out because we know we want to make sure we're leveling the playing field, because sometimes people would put it, sometimes they wouldn't. So we asked specifically for gaps of 3 months or more, so that we're getting consistent information. So that's actually in the work experience section. There's a question for that. The optional information doesn't include that, although we do ask for it. But yes, so grades, other things, other circumstances that might be, explain academic performance or other professional pieces that other than those gaps. Yeah, that's where optional information would be helpful.
All right, and then the video component.
Yeah.
You've had the video component for a long time now. And how is it valuable to you? And do you have any tips for it?
Yeah. So the video questions are another post-submission element. So like the behavioral assessment, after you hit submit, then you will be sent links to both the behavioral assessment and the video questions. And we have had those for a number of years. At Core, we use that to evaluate English language. And that's actually when we introduced these years ago, we eliminated the English language test requirements. So we don't require the TOEFL or the IELTS. And we felt that, much like the GMAT and the GRE, they were generally good, but they were sometimes a little off. People would score well, but actually in reality didn't speak so well. And people who had modest scores but actually were fine. So we wanted a way to assess that directly in a way that actually was cheaper and easier and more less of a burden for candidates. Although I know that they take, we have to take that. Sometimes I take the TOEFL IELTS for other schools, but for us, this takes another 20 minutes or so. 20 minutes of doing this as opposed to studying for and paying for the TOEFL IELTS seems like a good trade. But they are 3 questions that we have pre-recorded. We have 3 tranches, as we call them. They're with multiple questions and that are then randomly drawn, and so you will answer questions very not meant to be trick questions a little bit, but to get to know you more. So it's about your MBA aspirations, a behavioral question, and then there tends to be a question that kind of gets at some interest of yours, a little bit more of your personality. So it's at core of the English language, but we also want to get a sense of how you interact and speak extemporaneously, and a little bit of
Present
that
yourself.
aspect of your personality.
Yeah. What is Yale's SOM's perspective when it comes to use of AI in the application process? And do you ever, like, if you're watching a video, are you thinking this does not sound like the person in the essay?
Yeah, we do. I will say, and I think you asked also how to prepare for the video questions. I apologize.
I'll get back to that. I'll go back to that one, but
okay. Yeah, we do actually. For this year, we actually put out a statement on AI in the application, and the basic thrust of it is, you should use AI. We don't prohibit it, but we think you should use it wisely. You should use it the same way you would as a friend or a family member, in terms of thinking about how to brainstorm, how to get some rough organization or organizing your thoughts. It shouldn't be a way it shouldn't be writing your essay for you or answering questions for you, but it can be a tool you use and use it kind of wisely. We actually, interestingly, our statement on AI was developed in conjunction with AI, so we're kind of practicing what we preach. And specifically in terms of the video questions, and even for the interviews, we welcome people to campus to interview, but a lot of our interviews are still virtual over Zoom. And in both contexts, sometimes we do see people who are reading. They're clearly like they've got prepared answers, whether it's AI or otherwise, whether AI based or otherwise. And our advice is definitely don't do that. We would rather have a less perfect but genuine answer than something that's scripted and mechanical. That's just not what we're trying. You might not be able to connect with your interviewer or with the responses the same way if you're just kind of reading a response. So we feel as though maybe an imperfect response that is you, as opposed to something that you're reading, is definitely preferable.
All right, thank you. Let's go back to the question you correctly said I had asked, you had not answered, which is how to prepare for the video component.
Yes, yeah, no, I realized as I was speaking that I was answering a question that I think I created as opposed to the one you actually asked. Yeah, so there really isn't much. There's certainly the behavioral assessment. There's nothing to prepare because you're just answering a question about yourself. Video questions are similar to that. I think there is a little bit of, because we want to get a little bit of a sense of your reasons for getting the MBA, and there is some behavioral question component. You might want to think about, go back to your application, just kind of brush up on some typical admissions or job interview types of questions. So successes, failures, sort of teamwork, challenges, those types of things, those typical kind of behavioral areas. And then a little bit about why you want to get an MBA, what you want to do with it, those types of things. But really not any heavy preparation. It should hopefully be pretty straightforward. No trick questions. And what I tend to say for both of these components, but certainly with the video question, we very consistently tell candidates that this is not going to be, this is not going to determine the outcome of your candidacy. So I know it can be a little bit stressful. I think it's gotten less stressful post-pandemic because people are used to being on Zoom, when before we did this, before the pandemic, that interaction was maybe more foreign, a little bit less comfortable. But
I think this generation is used to being on camera.
I think that's right. So I think this is less of a stressor than it used to be. But I think even so, I would say don't feel as though this is like your whole candidacy is riding on this. We use it, as you say, with a light touch.
All right. And then the other question about the video component in terms of the format, do they have a few seconds to think about or organize their thoughts?
Yes. Okay. Yeah, so the way it works is we will ask the question. These are pre-recorded questions, and then you have usually either 20 or 30 seconds, or what we call think time, to think about your response, and then depending on the question, either 60 or 90 seconds to respond. So it's all very short, but you have a little bit of time. It's meant to approximate an interview, so it's not a perfect approximation, because in a live interview, you don't sit there for 20 seconds and think about your response, but in this format, it's helpful just to have a little bit of time just to gather your thoughts.
A live interview, you can say, let me think about that for a second, and just organize your thoughts. So
yeah, so it's a little bit like that.
Yeah, exactly. And speaking of the interview, what can applicants expect if they're lucky enough to be invited to interview? The real interview, the in-person or Zoom interview, like we're talking.
Yeah, no, and that's a good point too, actually, because as you mentioned earlier, the video questions are, that's part of your initial submission. And so everybody does the video questions, and then we do, as we're reviewing that applications, then we invite people to interview. And so the interviews are separate from, it's not, the video questions are no replacement for the interview. And interviews are, we're currently in our first round as we're speaking, and we are we're extending those invitations as we speak. When you're invited to interview, assuming you're invited to interview, these are 30-minute interviews. The interviewer has only seen your resume. They have not read your full application. The idea is for these to be as independent as possible. Which when I do interviews, I remind people you can talk about things you talk about in your application. It's all new information to me. And they are admissions staff do some. It's mostly trained second-year students who conduct these interviews, as well as some recent alumni who were themselves interviewers, and then staff. But I think the second years are the primary. They do most of these interviews. The interviews themselves are, again, pretty straightforward. They're not meant to be trick questions. They're structured in nature. We ask the same questions in the same order because we know that is important for the fairness and the predictive nature of the interviews. If it's unstructured, then it's really has no predictive value at all. And again, the questions are not meant to be tricks, not meant to kind of trip you up. But again, in preparing for them, think about why you want to get an MBA, what you hope to do with it. Maybe a little bit about why you help, how you hope to contribute to our community, and then some behavioral questions. Again, as I mentioned before, with the video questions, thinking about any sort of work experiences you've had in terms of sort of teamwork and challenges you faced, overcoming obstacles, successes, those types of things. It's good to have those examples ready, the typical examples you would think about for a job interview or an MBA interview. Sure.
Okay, good advice. Thank you very much for that. What are some common mistakes you see that applicants make in their applications?
Yeah, I think that's a good question. When we talk about that, I think we might talk about that a little bit in the application guide too. And we actually did add some, I don't know if anyone will. This will be a bonus, but like we do some videos and I'm in there where I think we do talk about some mistakes. And I think a couple that I would point out. One that you might hear from others, and it's not an uncommon thing, but it's a really significant thing. Is we do sometimes see candidates who try to present a candidacy that they think we're looking for in whatever dimension. Like they think, oh, this is, and this happens I think at other schools too. Oh, this is the finance school or the marketing school or the tech school or the operations school, and so I'm going to be that candidate. I don't think that helps you from a game theory perspective. I think if you're making yourself look more like everybody else who's applying, that's not the way to differentiate yourself. But at a more fundamental level, having done this for 20 years, it's very clear that you will position yourself best when you talk about things that really matter to you, that you really kind of present your truest self. When you're trying to present yourself as someone who's not who you really are, it kind of falls flat. And so I think there are fewer people who are doing that now than when I started. I think people understand that that's not a winning formula, but I think there are still some people who try to present the version of themselves that they think we want to see. So that's one. And then one other thing I would say is we often, it sounds counterintuitive, but I do tell people, try to embrace your mistakes, which isn't necessarily to lead with your mistakes, but and there's no such thing as a perfect candidate. Everybody has strengths and weaknesses. If there's a weaker part of your profile, obviously there's no such thing as one size fits all advice. I can't say exactly how to do in every situation, but I would think about if you have a weakness, kind of helping us understand it. Then maybe the optional information section is a place for that. Helping contextualize it, helping us get past it, as opposed to ignoring it and then having us maybe make more of it than is truly there.
Right. I was just having nothing to do with admissions. There's this wonderful gift that we all have as human beings, and it's called the ability to change.
Yeah.
And so there's providing context, as you mentioned. Yep. And B, there's showing that that's not really you. Either the circumstances that contributed to the decline in grades or whatever bump in life you had, weakness, no longer exist, or that you've shown how to deal with them. Yeah. And that is the gift of change. So I think, your point is very well taken, that if there is a blemish, a weakness, whatever you want to call it, something you're not so proud of in your profile, yeah, you're going to present everything that's great about you, but own the mistake, own the whatever it is. And like you say, provide the context and show that it doesn't really represent you.
Yeah.
There's other stuff out there that's a much better representation of you.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I think that's right. So that I think you put it very well. And the idea of kind of learning and growing. I mean, if you were a perfectly formed human being, you wouldn't be coming to get an MBA, right? You'd already know it all, but you're doing this for a reason. You're trying to grow by doing this. And so how have you done that up till now? I think that's a great way to put it.
Right. Sounds good. All right. So people who, I don't know if we call them made a mistake or had a weakness, but they're reapplying to Yale.
Yeah.
Okay. They are trying to grow. They're trying to change. They're trying to change an outcome. What advice do you have for them?
Yeah, and we have a good number of candidates who do that. I want to say, I don't know if this is exactly right, if this is current information, but I think about 10% of our applicants are re-applicants, so it's not an uncommon thing.
And how is that? What is their acceptance rate comparable or higher? Do you know?
It's historically been comparable. So there's no stigma or bias against re-applicants. It's roughly comparable to first-time applicants. And usually we actually, we will invite people to seek feedback. And so we will give you feedback over the summer between your previous application and your subsequent application, or if you are applying the next year, sometimes people wait more than 1 year. But we will give you feedback for you to work on. And I guess that's in the vein of kind of like learning and growing. That's a good sign, regardless of what the outcome. If you take the feedback and try to work with it, that's always a good sign. So, but what I tend to tell re-applicants is, think about your second application or third. We have people who apply 3 times, and sometimes the third time is a charm. But think about that as a continuation of your previous application, in the sense that we're not necessarily going to look at them side by side, or we're not necessarily going to go back and look at the previous one. But although we might refer to it if we need to, but I guess there are kind of 2 extremes. You can either just submit the same application and kind of hope the outcome is better this time. Or we have some people who do that, and that seems like not quite the recipe for success. And then the other extreme, we have people who are so radically different you don't even recognize them. And they say before they wanted to go in private equity, and now they want to go in start a nonprofit. You're like, what happened? And so I think you want to think about the application as an extension. It's not going to be exactly the same as the previous one, but it can be an expansion of or build out of the previous application.
So can they assume that you're going to look at the previous application if they're a re-applicant?
Not, it's interesting. We used to more consistently look at the previous application. Now we don't do it as consistently. We treat it as its own, but we will refer back at times. So I think you can assume that we might look at it,
okay,
but not that we know that we're don't refer to your previous application as though we're kind of like it's a dialogue with the 2 applications.
Yeah,
it should be a new application.
Okay. And let's take a different group of people, not people applying this cycle, but people looking ahead to apply in fall 2025 or 2026. What advice would you give that group of applicants?
So the people applying maybe a year from now or beyond.
Exactly. They're working.
I think to the extent you're starting to think about the process, first of all, congratulations, because you're very early on the game. And I think that's always good. There are lots of different pieces of advice I give for different aspects of the kind of the exploration process. But one of the things I would think about is sort of have conversations, do some research, talk to students, talk to alumni, family, friends, colleagues who've been to business school, whether the specific schools you're interested in or think you're interested in or more generally. It's helpful to know why they went, what they got out of it. You could start to learn about sort of the maybe some specific aspects of the schools, but just having conversations about the MBA and what it can do and is always a good thing. We have, and I know other schools do as well, we have student ambassadors who will talk about their experience and share what their life is like here at Yale, here in New Haven, and those are always helpful. We have events. We have virtual events, so you don't have to go anywhere. If you want to come to campus, you can, but you don't have to. But there are lots of ways to engage, and so doing that research, I think, can be very helpful.
Right. Okay, great advice. What would you have liked me to ask you?
Oh gosh, it was pretty comprehensive. We touched on a lot of things. I'm trying to think if there's anything. I mean, I guess one thing I would say maybe in the vein of the background information and kind of the context and the behavioral assessment, trying to expand opportunity, we have done a number of things to try to be more expansive and to kind of open the doors here at Yale to a wider range. And one thing that we've, I guess two things we've done this year are expand our application fee waiver program to over 700 schools that have a 35% or higher of Pell eligible students. So really kind of to open up that opportunity. And we actually just launched a new Aspire Fellowship program, so scholarships for incoming students who have overcome significant challenges. And that's we're going to offer $5 million through that program. So we're really trying to do what we can to, as I think when we announced the Aspire, I think one of the things I said, which I believe is, talent is everywhere, but opportunity doesn't always match talent. And we're trying to close that gap as much as we can. So those are a couple of things we've been doing this current cycle to try to further those efforts.
Great. Well, Bruce, I want to thank you so much for joining me today. Where can listeners and potential applicants learn more about Yale SOM's MBA program?
Yeah, so I definitely, on our website, yale.som.edu is great. You mentioned the application guide for those who are specifically interested in applying. We did put a lot of effort into that, so hopefully that's helpful. So I would recommend that. And then obviously you can always email us at mba.admissions@yale.edu, and we're happy to engage directly.
Okay, great. Well, we're going to include links in the show notes at accepted.com/598 to the sites that Bruce just mentioned, including the guide, as well as to related articles and show notes. Listener, thank you too for joining Bruce DelMonico and me for our 598th episode. If you find the show worthwhile, I have a suggestion for you. Tell your MBA applicant friends. They'll thank you, and so do I. Quick reminder, take our quiz at accepted.com/mapmba. It's free, and it will give you a chance to see if you have a solid approach to your MBA application. Plus, it also links to additional resources. Take the quiz at accepted.com/mapmba. Thanks again for coming. This is Admission Straight Talk, produced by Accepted, and I am your host, Linda Abraham. I'll talk to you again soon.